now meet the big shot himself, Sir Basil Zaharoff, mystery man of Europe, maker of kings and the greatest munition salesman ever known. Of Zaharoff, it has been said that the tombstones of millions killed in munitions he sold will form his monument, and their dying groans shall be his epitaph. Before the war, Krupp invented a special fuse for hand grenades. But during the war, Vickers, the English company, used this invention to turn out grenades to kill German soldiers. When the war was over, Krupp sued Vickers for infringement of patent rights, asking a shilling a fuse for killing their own people. This suit was settled out of court, with Krupp getting their share of the blood money. Scientists were working night and day on new inventions which would make death quicker and devastate more country in less time. Progress. Progress in destruction and bigger profits. And all this time, while heroes were being made on the battlefields, dead heroes and live ones, a tragic comedy was being played behind the scenes. The armament manufacturers were the actors. The international fraternity was doing its best bit of fraternizing. Germany needed nickel and copper and aluminum to manufacture these guns and shells. She didn't have enough glycerin for her gunpowder. That shortage might have ended the war sooner. But would producers in enemy countries let a little thing like that stop the war? If Germany needed copper and nickel to carry on the war, the French munitions boys would try her with it. Not too openly, of course, but every country has a back door. Switzerland was the path to Germany. So metal ore was shipped by French arms makers into Switzerland. In Switzerland, the French trademarks were replaced by Swiss labels. Then the train moved on into Germany, and German munitioneers were safe. They had French raw materials to kill more French soldiers. The arms makers believed in friendly cooperation between competitors. When French members of the fraternity needed raw materials, their German brothers in arms did as much for them. By this reciprocal exchange of material, the war was kept going and business was at its peak. In spite of the blockade of German ports by the British Navy, in spite of the rigorous Allied control of the world's metal supplies, Krupp was able to obtain the essential raw materials for its war factories. The Swiss and the Swedes, the Americans, and all the other broad-minded neutrals participated in the international commerce which made it possible to continue the war, as Zaharoff said, until the very end. French nickel and copper was being shipped back to France, all right, all wrapped up in a nice big shell, shot back with the compliments of the Germans. And here is the munitions racket in all its power and glory. Early in the war, the Germans captured the French town of Briey, near Verdun, where tremendous mines and iron smelters were located. These mines and smelters supplied the iron that made the guns that killed French soldiers. Now, you would have thought that the French would have recaptured this territory, or else blown it to Kingdom Come, like the villages all around it. But no, they deliberately avoided shelling Briey. A general who tried it was replaced by one who let it strictly alone. The Germans were equally kind to the town of Dombasle, further south, where the French had their own great iron mines and smelters. There was a gentleman's agreement that if the French left Briey alone, the Germans would spare Dombasle. With devastation all around them, Briey and Dombasle survived the war without a scratch. Seems incredible, but the facts were brought out after the armistice by French officers who had wanted to shell Briey and had been told in no uncertain terms that a hands-off policy was in effect. And while men were dying like flies at nearby Verdun, the mines and smelters of Briey were left intact so that the war and the profits might continue. If Briey had been shelled, The Germans wouldn't have had sufficient raw materials to continue fighting. But it wasn't. And so the war lasted 2 years longer. 10 million men paid with their lives so that business might go on as usual. It cost $25,000 to kill each soldier in the last war. Munitions plants reached a new peak of activity. Profits skyrocketed. In France, in Germany, in England and America, everywhere, amazing fortunes were piled up. The stock exchanges concealed the market value of munition stocks. Profits increased in direct proportion to the ever-growing lists of dead and wounded. Stock prices and casualty lists skyrocketed together. It was a pagan holiday for the dealers in debt. And then came the armistice. The peace conference at Versailles followed. It looked as though with the signing of the Versailles Treaty, this war racket at last was over. What would the poor arms makers do now? They had had a taste of blood, and they shuddered at the prospect of lean days ahead as they watched the peacemakers carve out a new Europe. Maybe their profits would be carved out, too. The arms racketeers need not have been perturbed. At the very time Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and the others were drawing up the Versailles Treaty, new wars were breaking out all over the map. The Bolsheviks were the new enemy, and fresh guns were trained on Petrograd and Moscow. First came Admiral Kolchak's offensive, then the wars in Siberia. First Kolchak, then Yudenich, Generals Denikin, and finally Wrangel. All received English, French, and American arms. The Allies were meddling in Russian affairs, financing white armies, north, east, and south, unleashing a new war frenzy. While the Allies talked peace in Paris, a revolution in Hungary brought the Romanians and Hungarians together in another nasty little war. In Poland, Pilsudski's troops were fighting the Red Russians in still another. Never stopping, these arms manufacturers went right on about their business. The world might be in the grip of a post-war depression with millions out of work and governments unable to pay their debts. But the munitions makers continued to prolong war, disturb peace, and make money. And with them, the gun-making business. Makers didn't care to what end their products came. They were reaping enormous dividends, which the youth of the world were earning for them on the battlefields of Europe. The United States alone spent more than $500 million for automatics and $750 million for ammunition. Dumps were piled high with hundreds of thousands of $25 rifles and $1,300 bombs. Shells cost $100 an inch, with 10-inch shells selling for $1,000 apiece and 16-inch ones costing $1,600, the annual salary of 3 European white-collar workers.